Today on StampTV, I'm going to show you a fun card project featuring the brand new StampTV kit called Winter Cheer. Let me show you the tools and products you need to make this card project. First, you're going to need some ink, and I'm using the Memento Tuxedo Black ink along with some VersaMark ink. Then you're going to need some paper and cardstock. And I am using, first, these vintage cuts. This is from the Winter Cheer Vintage Cut pack, and these are in white. Then I'm going to be using some of the cardstock and pattern paper from the kit, including a piece of this pattern paper from the Winter Cheer 6x6 pattern paper pack, some of the Ocean Mist in white, and also some of the black Onyx. Then you're going to need a die. Now, if you don't have a window die, you can also use some sort of square punch and punch out different squares inside a larger square of cardstock. But this is our new window die, and I really love this die because it fits perfectly with this particular stamp from the Winter Cheer stamp set. For stamps, I'm using this little forest of winter trees along with the greeting that says Winter Wishes, and I'm using both of the snowmen. I'm also going to be using some embossing powder. So I'm using our fine detail white powder and an embossing magic pad to remove any excess oil or static or anything from the surface of the card. I'm also using a little brush. I use this little paint brush just to remove any embossing powder that ends up on the cardstock where you don't want it. For glitter, I'm using the Wink of Stella brush pen. This is the clear glitter. I'll be using some 1/4" pop dots, and I'll be using some mono adhesive tape and some Spectrum Noir markers. The colors that I'm going to be using are GG1, GG3, GB8, OR1, BT5, and GT1. And you can find comparable colors in other markers, whether you're using water-based markers, Memento, Stampin' Up, Marvy, or you're using other alcohol markers like Copics or Prismacolor. So you'll be able to find comparable colors. Just test them out on a little piece of paper first to make sure they coordinate with your patterned paper. All right, to begin, I'm going to start with this piece of Ocean Mist cardstock. And what I'm going to do with it is I'm going to first use my embossing magic pad over the entire surface. And that removes the static and oils. Then I'm going to ink up this stamp using some of the VersaMark ink. And with a bigger stamp like this, I like to lay the stamp on its back and then ink it up this way to make sure that I get really good coverage all over that stamp. All right. Then I'm going to stamp this right in the center, and I'm going to press down to make sure I get a good transfer of ink. And then I'm going to flip it over, and I'm just going to rub all along each of those trees. Just want to make sure I really get them solid, inked up. There we go. Okay, so now I know that's a little bit hard to see because it's just leaving a watermark, but once I get the white embossing powder on there, you'll be able to see that with no problem. So I'm going to use that white embossing powder. And what's nice about our embossing powder, the fine detail powder really, really works well on stamps like this. Okay, so there we have the tree stamp, and it's covered with embossing powder. And then if there's any place that you don't want it, you can just brush it off. Okay. And I love how these trees are all rustic and aged looking. They look like birch trees. Okay. So now I'm going to use the Marvy heat tool, and I'm going to heat the embossing powder, and you'll see how nice and bright white it comes up once I do that. Huge difference. See that starting to come up? Flip it. Okay. So I'm going to give that just a second to cool down. And in the meantime, I'm going to cut out my window. And I'm going to do that using the Cuttlebug and that die. I'm going to start with an A and a B plate. And I'm going to use a piece of cardstock that measures 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches. And I'm going to place that die up toward the top because I want to leave a little bit of room at the bottom to stamp my greeting. And you just want to make sure that's nice and straight before you put your C plate on top. So now I'm going to put that C plate on. And then for my Cuttlebug, I need to add a piece of cardstock to really get this to cut. I would try it first before you do that to make sure that you actually need that. You don't want to crack one of your plates. But if you're not getting a full cut, it's not the die, it's just that it needs to be tightened up a little bit, and you can do that with a single piece of cardstock. So you can save all these little pieces to stamp on. You can make little flags, and you can stamp tiny little inchy type stamps on these little squares. So you put those aside. But there is that beautiful window. Isn't that pretty? Okay. So now that I have the window done, I'm going to stamp the greeting down here at the bottom. And I'm going to do that with some of the Memento black because I want that to match my snow people. And I'm going to be using Memento for that as well. So let me ink up this Winter Wishes greeting and stamp that right down here at the bottom. Excuse my head if it gets in the way. Just want to make sure I get it in the right spot. And there is the Winter Wishes greeting. Now while I have the black ink pad out, I'm going to grab those little vintage cuts. And I brought a couple here. There we go. So the first one is this snowman, and he fits right on there. So I'm going to ink him up real well with some Memento ink, and then I'm going to stamp him onto that vintage cut. Okay. Then I'm going to stamp the other one on the other vintage cut. And even with clear stamps, it's not always super easy to stamp on pre-cut pieces. So if you have a problem or you really are a perfectionist, then make sure you use a square block and a Stamp-A-Majig, and you'll get them perfect every time. Oops. There we go. Okay. So now I'm going to color these little snow people in with some of the markers. I'm going to start with the BT5, and I'm going to color in the hat. And I'm not using any particular fancy shading technique or anything like that. I just want to go with some nice, bright, vibrant color. And I'll do his little scarf. Then I want to make my other little snow person to match. So I'm going to do her hat. I'm pretending she's a girl. I don't know what they are. I can't tell with snow people, but I think she might be a girl. So we'll do that there, and then we'll do her scarf to match too. And again, just straight coloring, no fancy blending or texturizing, because I'm going to add a little bit of sparkle to all of this. I love sparkly Christmas cards. Okay, so there now we have that part done. Then I'm going to go with the GT1, and I'm going to color the rest of the hat in that light color. And I'm picking my colors based on that pattern paper. I just kind of scribbled on all the different light turquoise blues that I had and found the ones that I liked the best with the pattern paper. And that's a real good way to find out what colors you want to use. All right, almost done that. There we go. And my next color is going to be the GG3, and I'm going to finish off the scarf down here. I see I missed a spot, so I'll go back and fill that in. There we go. Back with that BT5 and fill in that little spot I missed. Alright, so now for their noses, I'm going to use the OR1. I want a nice orange color. For the star, I'm using GB8. Any gold will do. Okay, and then my final color, which is the GG1, that's just a real light gray. And I'm just going to color a little bit around the inside perimeter of these snowmen, just to give a little depth. Kind of under the scarf there. Like that. A little bit hard to see on the camera, but when you do this yourself, you'll like the way this looks. Just a little bit of kind of depth and shadowing. Alright, so now my snow people are done. Now I do want to add a little bit of Wink of Stella pen to them, so I'm going to add a little bit up here on the hat and then on the scarf, and same with this one, a little bit on the hat here, and the ball on the end, and on the scarf. And now I'm going to just sit those aside and let them dry. Now I want to add a little bit of sparkle to the trees. So I'm going to use the Wink of Stella pen, and I'm going to just rub it over the surface of the trees, because I want this to look very Christmassy, very snowy. And you can see I'm adding a little bit of shadow around the outside. That's going to fade a lot once it dries, but that'll leave some shimmer behind, so I'm going around the outside like that. You can see how that looks. It might be a little hard to see the shimmer, but when I turn it, you'll be able to see it pretty well. This Wink of Stella pen is really fun. Get that shimmer inside that hollow spot. And finish up this side. Now, it's going to stick just fine to the cardstock, so around the perimeter you won't have any problem at all. But we also want to get it to stick to the embossing powder, which it's most likely going to rub right off because that is not a porous surface. So what I'm going to do is, let's see if you can see some of that shimmer there. You see that? What I'm going to do is I'm going to hit it again with the heat tool, and that's going to melt the embossing powder just a little bit so that that glitter will just grab right in it, and then once it cools it'll be permanent. Just a real light heating. Okay, and now that shimmer is permanently in that embossing powder and also around the perimeter. There we go. Okay, so now it's time to assemble this card. And this part is very easy. What you're going to do is take a small piece of this patterned paper. I have some scissors here, so I'll just cut that kind of to match this. You can cut this ahead of time if you want on your paper cutter. Let's see if this will work. Yeah, I can trim that a little bit more. So let's just do that. Slip the scissors behind there. Okay. And I'm going to make the top of my window look like it's snowflakes, maybe even a little Christmassy snowflake window treatment. So the way I'm going to adhere that is just put a little bit of tape on both sides and line it up against the bottom. Don't bend it when you do it like I just did. Okay. And that will give us our top treatment. Now another fun thing that you can do is you can take this particular die and cut a couple different patterns out, and then you can kind of paper piece the different patterns inside. So that's another way to do it. But that will work just fine. Okay, and now we're going to add this panel, and this is going to be coming through the window like this. So what we're going to do again is we're going to tape up the sides here, tape across the bottom, and then you can add a little bit of tape along those panes to make sure it'll stick to the cardstock in the center as well. And just line it up. You can see it's a nice fit. I designed this stamp to match this die. I love the die, and I thought it would be a really fun mix. Okay, so there we have our beautiful winter window. Now this whole panel is going to go on top of a piece of black, our black onyx. And because embossing powder, the embossing technique can warp the paper a little bit, I always like to add a little bit of extra tape in the center so that I can really get it to lay flat. All right, there we go. So there is the window. And this whole panel is going to go on top of an ocean mist card base. So we'll do that part next. There we go. Now for my little snow people, I'm going to put one there and one there. And I would be putting these on using the 1/4-inch pop dots. So they're kind of in front of the window and not just pressed right up against the window. Now I've already made a card, so you don't have to watch me put the pop dots on. Here is that finished card project, and you can see that little bit of raised, see the shadow under there. So they're raised up using those 1/4-inch pop dots. I hope you've enjoyed today's holiday card project. Stay tuned to StampTV for weeks of inspiration using the new Winter Cheer StampTV kit.